Very welcome to this video on compositing in Photoshop. So we're going to look at this particular image here today, which is a stock image from pixels.com, and we're going to use it to create a new background for the cigarette lighter. So if we just open it, I'm just going to take it, click on it, drag it and drop it onto the Photoshop workspace. And here we have it. And you can see at the moment it's pretty uncontrasty, pretty flat. Of course, it's a stock image, so a lot of stock photographers will upload images like this where they have a lot of tonal information within them. So we're just going to take this and we're going to create a new background for it using the gradient tool and composite it onto that background. So at the moment, I just want to check what my resolution of the image is here. So I'm going to go to image and image size. I want to check what the pixel resolution is. So you can see here it's about 4000 by 3000 pixels. So if we create a new image, so if I go to File and New, I'm going to create a new image using pixels, and I'm going to make it the new image 4000 by 3000 pixels, and I'm going to leave the rest of the information the same. So 8-bit RGB. Just the background I'm going to change to transparent because we don't necessarily need the white color. And my color profile will be Adobe RGB 1998. And I'm going to click on Create. So now we have this blank canvas from which we're going to start with. So we're going to use this then to create a background, first of all, to place the cigarette lighter on, and then we're going to create a reflection on the surface that we'll place it on as well. So the first thing I want to do is to create the surface of the table of where the product is appearing. So we're going to use, as I mentioned, the gradient tool. So it's this one here in Photoshop. So it's also G is the shortcut on the keyboard, and we're going to create a basic. We're going to keep the colors pretty monochromatic, and we're going to use just grays. So here we have our foreground color and our background color. So we're just going to bring these closer together on the kind of scale. So this is going to be our dark color, and then this is going to be our light color. So something like this. And we're just going to create a very basic gradient for it. So what I actually want to do is I don't want to create a gradient out of the entire canvas. I only want a section of it. So I'm going to use the rectangular marquee tool to define that section. So I select that, and we're going to about here. Just going to deselect that. I didn't select all the way down to the bottom. So now we have that done. Now we'll go back to our gradient tool, and I drag up so it'll only fill it in as far as what we created there. So this is going to act as the surface that we place the cigarette lighter on. And I'm going to do Control D to deselect. Okay. So that's our surface. We'll need to add some kind of depth of field to this, so we will blur this a little bit in a moment, but at the moment I want to create the background. So the background, we're going to use the gradient tool again, but we're going to use the radial gradient. So in a similar way, so if we just have a look here, we need to create a new layer first of all. So I'm going to create a layer, a second layer, and put that below. So I'm going to call this one background, and then this one will be, this is the foreground where our object is going to be sitting on. Just correct my spelling, foreground. Okay. So this is good practice to always name your layers so you know what is what, and it can help when you have multiple layers in your file. So now I'm going to select the background layer, and I've got the radial gradient selected, and I'm just going to try this first of all to see how this looks. And that's, so what we're going to use for this is I started using the same colors, but I'm not going to do that. I want to get the lighter grays to be slightly lighter, and I want the darker ones to be darker. So go back just. So it might take a bit of experimenting to get it exactly how you might like it. So the further you drag this up, you can see the larger that area will be. So this is kind of okay for me now at the moment. Yeah, so what we want to do now is just blur, so add some depth of field blur. So I'm just going to use the Gaussian blur tool. So I go to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and we're just going to add about 5 to that. And then, so we've just blurred that line just to make it a little bit more realistic. So at the moment it does look pretty flat, it looks pretty uninteresting, but we're going to add in this. So we're going to create a selection here. I'm going to use this object selection tool to select the lighter. So we're going to just draw a square around it. So I'm going to get my rectangle, or you can just click on it as well if you want to. So it's actually doing a pretty good job when I go over this, and I just click on it once when it highlights it in blue, and it will select it. So it's just processing it now at the moment. So it'll take a minute depending on how fast or slow your computer is or how big the file is. It will take a few moments for the selection to be made. So now we have our selection. So we want to go in and check the selection. So in my select and mask options, I want to go in and just check that we've got a nice selection. So sometimes this requires that you add a little bit of smoothing. So if I do a zoom and remove, you can see the edges are quite jagged at the moment. So we can add some smoothing to that to just smooth the edge out. So that's looking a lot better. We can also add some feathering. So in this case, maybe add 1 feathering. The amount of feathering you add, so 1, not 10, might depend on the size of the image that you're editing. So that's too much. So I'm just adding 1. So yeah, that's a slight bit of blur, which is quite okay for this. So I'm going to click on OK. And now do Control 0 to zoom back out. And we're going to take our Move tool, which is V on the keyboard. And I'm going to click, drag this up to my new image, and then drop it down. And then I'm just going to place it here. So you can see that it's going to require a little bit of work to get this integrated. We can probably make it looks a bit too big, I think, in this. So I'm going to make it smaller. So if I grab this from the corner, it should keep the proportions as long as this key is highlighted here, this chain. It will link the width and the height, so we'll keep it that proportional. And so I'm going to go for about this size. I think looks good, and I'm going to just place it in the center right here. So I'm happy with that. I click on the little tick up here at the top in the tool options, and now we need to just integrate it. So we want this surface to seem like it's a little bit reflective, certainly more reflective than the original images was. So here I'm going to put in the layer's name, and then I'm going to create a copy of this layer. So I'm simply going to create a copy of this layer. There's a number of ways you can do it. You can drag it down to the new layers icon, or you can use a keyboard shortcut to do that. So this is going to be the reflection. So I'm going to just flip this around. So I need to do 2 flips. I need to go and flip this vertically, and then you'll notice that when I bring it down, we've got the vertical flip, and it's actually, yeah, this is just fine. So for this, it's just fine. The vertical flip was okay. We don't need to flip it in the other direction. So now we need to just, I need to just place this behind the lighter layer. So I need to go and drag the layer here in the layers panel below the lighter one. So the reflection should be below it. And because the end of this is slightly rounded, so you just have to make sure that in order to make it look realistic, it should be appearing slightly underneath So there should be a slight crossover between them. Okay, so now we need to make this look more like a reflection. So we need to make it look so that it's fading into the surface. So I need to make this less consistent. So I can also use the gradient tool to do this in combination with a mask. So we can add a mask to this. So in order to add a mask, I can go ahead and click on the layer, which is the reflection layer. So that's selected. And then I just come down here and I add layer mask. So now I've added a layer mask, and I'm going to go back to my gradient tool and select the standard linear gradient. And we've got black and white selected. So if I do this, we fade it, but this is from the wrong direction. So I need to do Control Z on that, and what I need to do is I need to reverse these. So you can either click on these little arrows here, or X on the keyboard will do the same thing. So I'll do it again, and this is more like the effect we want to get. So you can try and get it, experiment with it until you get it the way you want it. So that looks pretty much okay to me. Another thing that will help is just slightly reducing the opacity of that layer. So I can, because the reflected layer will always be slightly transparent looking. So I can reduce the opacity of that down to, I think that's good. We've reduced it down to about 68%. So now it looks more like a reflection. So if we look at this image, so here we have not so shiny surface, and so here we've composited it into a brand new background that we've created ourselves. What I'd like to do is I'd like to add a little bit of contrast and color to this. So what we can do here is that if we go to our adjustment layers, and I can go to my vibrance, and I get vibrance and saturation. So this will allow me to change the vibrance and saturation, and I want to do it to the lighter. So if I increase that, I increase the vibrance, or I can also then increase the saturation. So that will do it for all layers. Since we're working with a monochromatic background here, where it is just or at least where it's just the colors are just gray tones, you don't see any change when you increase the vibrance. If you were working with that and you only wanted to change the color of the lighter, what you can do in that instance is you could create your adjustment layer and turn it into a clipping layer by going to the layer menu and go to we need to find create clipping mask. So create clipping mask will force your adjustment layer to only affect the layer directly below it. So now it is only affecting this layer below it. It's not even affecting this one here. Okay. So one other thing that we'd like to do is perhaps we could add a little bit of blur to this reflection, because at the moment if we zoom in, we're going to see it's pretty sharp, and normally reflected surfaces, especially ones that fade off like this, will diffuse light a little bit, so we'll add a little bit of blur to it. So in order to do that, the first thing what we'll do is we can make a smart object from this. So I go to filter, and I want to go to convert for smart filters. So now our reflection is a smart filter. So that means that we can go back and adjust this blurring at any time we want to. So if I go to filter, and then I go to the blur, and we go back to our Gaussian blur, and we see at the moment it's on 5. Maybe we can reduce that, because we just want to create a very, very subtle blur. Maybe a little bit stronger, maybe 3 is enough. So we click on 3 and click OK. So now that this is a smart object, that we created a smart object out of this layer, or a smart filter, we have access, so I can go back into my Gaussian blur again. Our setting is stored here, and we can readjust it if we want to, if we find that that 3 is too strong or not strong enough. So there we have it. So this is how to composite your object into a background that you create yourself. And once you're finished with this, then you can either save it as a PSD file, or if you want to save it as a complete image, you can flatten it using the layer menu and flatten image, and then save it as a JPEG or TIFF. Okay, thank you for watching.